There were two stories that I did as a photographer that were more than just assignments to me, that I got very emotionally involved in. The first was I was sent by Time magazine to take pictures of Aborigines, to do a cover story about Aborigines in the outback. So I went to Alice Springs, right in the heart of the Australian outback. I walked out of my hotel, and the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen in my life was washing the windows of my hotel. And so without thinking, I lifted up my camera, took a few photographs, and she started screaming at me and said, put your damn cameras down, and who the hell do you think you are? And I said, I'm sorry. And she said, well, you're some kind of parasitic journalist down here to take advantage of our poor Aborigines. And I said, lady, I'm sorry, just excuse myself, and I left. I met the young woman who was working for me, and we spent the day taking pictures and talking to the Aborigines. And at the end of the day, the woman working for me said, what are you doing tonight? And I said, I'm going to go back and work on my captions. And she said, well, a group of us who work with Aborigines are getting together for dinner at a friend's house. Would you like to come and meet some of the other local social workers? I said, sure. So I go to this address, I knock on the door, and of course, who opens the door but the woman who'd been washing the windows of my hotel. I walked in the backyard, and there were 4 camels tied up. So I went back to my friend and said, why does she have camels in the backyard? And she said, Robin's going to walk 2,000 miles alone with her camels and her dog Diggity from here through the Gibson Desert out to the Indian Ocean. At the end of the week, the woman working for me said, Robin wants to ask you a favor, and now she's a little embarrassed because she's been giving you so much grief. And I said, what's the favor? She said she wants to write to National Geographic and ask if they would fund her trip. And she wants to use your name as a reference. So I said, sure. So I got back to the States, and I got a call from the editor of National Geographic who said, we got a letter from this woman who's asking us to fund her trip. It sounds really intriguing. We're thinking of funding it, but we don't want to have National Geographic's name on someone who's going to die out there. Is she serious, or is she like a nutcase? And I said, she's very intense. She's very focused. I've seen the camels, I've seen her maps. And he said, well, since you guys are such good friends, would you like to be the photographer to find her 5 times during the next 9 months in the outback? So that turned into one of the most interesting assignments of my life. She got lost, she got attacked by herds of wild camels in the outback. She ran out of water. It was just the most interesting year of my life as a photographer. Every time I left, I thought I'd never see her again. She was always kind of challenging me throughout the whole trip. We had lots of conversations about what a journalist is, and I was also trying to understand what she was doing out there. At the end of the trip, she said to me, are you going back to being a parasite and a prostitute now? And I said, okay, what does that mean? She said, well, okay, before my trip, somebody calls you up and says, okay, go care about Aborigines for a week, go care about that for a week. And she said, I think my trip is the first time you've actually cared about anything that somebody didn't tell you to care about. So my question is, are you going back to being a photographer and waiting for someone else to tell you what to photograph, or are you going to try to use your talents as a photographer to try to affect the situation? So it was sort of like, go cut off the head of the dragon, you can win the hand of the princess. I was sort of felt like this challenge to go off and try to, prove myself, maybe not to her, but just to actually, take what she said pretty seriously. So after Robin's trip, I was assigned by a magazine to photograph children who had been fathered by American GIs and abandoned all over the world. This is back in the 70s, late 70s, who were the offspring of love affairs. And in the middle of doing the story about these children, I met a little girl who was 11 years old who had been fathered by a GI. She'd never met her father. I spent a week with this girl, and she was absolutely fascinating. Just unlike most of the children I photographed, she didn't seem haunted, or even though she looked almost totally American to me. Most of the kids, the more American you looked, the more prejudiced you were against. The kids would beat you up and ridicule you and make fun of you. But this little girl seemed to be very confident and very popular with the other kids. And at the end of the week, I'd spent a week living with her and her grandmother. The grandmother started crying the day that it was my time to leave, and I had a translator that came back at the end of my week because I couldn't afford to have her there the whole week. And I asked what was happening, and the translator started crying. And I said, okay, I did something wrong here, so tell me what's going on because I want to apologize. And the translator said, no, you didn't do anything wrong. The grandmother thinks she's dying, and she wants to know if you'll take Unsuk, her 11-year-old granddaughter to America with you. I said, look, can I get you a hospital? Can I get you to a doctor? I mean, why do you think you're dying? And she just said, I know that I'm dying, and I haven't told my granddaughter. And I said, if you're serious, I will see if I can find a friend, someone else in my world that has, that might be interested. So I called my best friends. They agreed to adopt her basically on the course of a phone call. My friends flew to Korea. The second night they were there, we woke up and our hotel had caught on fire. And we were trapped in this room on the 11th floor with people jumping out of the windows below us as the fire worked its way up the hotel. I still have nightmares about it. We finally got out about an hour into the fire. And so Natasha ended up living in an orphanage for 3 months until all the paperwork went through. And the fellow that ran the orphanage had 75 children in this orphanage, and he said, I have to talk to you about her. I said, oh, what's wrong? He goes, no, just come in. And he closed the door. And he said, Natasha's been here a week. He said, I have 75 children in this orphanage and 3 women, and I have to take care of all these kids. It's total bedlam all the time. He said she walked in the second day she was here and she made up a list of all the older children and assigned them to one of the younger children. She walked in and told me that my room is messy and that I need to clean up the orphanage more often, and she's basically running the orphanage. She's 11 years old. She's been here a week. He says, I don't know who her grandmother was, but I've never met a child like this before. He had this great story. He said that there's 3 kinds of children. He said, I've had hundreds of children come to the orphanage. He said, you've got children who are glass. And basically something terrible happens to them and they're just shattered. You can never really put the pieces back together again. And then you've got plastic kids where no matter what happens, it just bounces off of them. And he said, I've only met one other child like this, but I think of them as steel. It's like the more adversity they go through, the stronger they get. And he said, this girl, Natasha, I can't wait to see what she does with her life, because there's something, the moment she walks in a room, the whole room reorients itself around her. The strangest part for me, and this is a very short version of the story, is that Natasha's now 43. My children have sleepovers with her children. Her kids are 6 and 8, my kids are 10 and 12. Part of my brain still can't quite grasp what that means. She's like my kid sister. And those 2 stories, Robin's camel trip and Natasha's amazing journey, to America and to becoming sort of the all-American kid, that sort of led me to wanting to understand and control a little bit more of the final product, which sort of led to the idea of the day in the life books, where at least a group of us as photographers could control sort of the horizontal and the vertical, to quote the old Twilight Zone episodes. Hi, I'm Rick Smolan. Please subscribe to THNKR.